Elena pressed her fist to her lips, stifling a sob that threatened to break free. The smell of fresh paint mingled with the dust motes hanging in the afternoon air, creating a thick atmosphere that seemed to suck the oxygen from her lungs. 25 years. 25 years since she'd woken with empty arms and a broken heart, and now she was here, in the same house where it all happened, watching David tear up floorboards with an almost obsessive determination. "He's here," David murmured, without looking up from his work. The hammer trembled in his calloused hands, and Elena noticed the gray hairs clinging to his sweat-slicked forehead. "I can feel it." The sound of splintering wood echoed through the empty room, a sharp crack that made Elena flinch. Each blow seemed to reverberate through time, bringing back the memory of that terrible night. The rain lashing against the windows, the muffled cries, the silence that followed, more deafening than any storm. "David, please," she whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. "We can't keep doing this. We've searched everywhere." He stopped, his hands still gripping the hammer, and finally looked at her. His brown eyes, which once shone with hope each dawn, now seemed like empty wells. "You've given up on him," he said, and each word was like a slap to Elena's face. "But I haven't. I'll never give up." The accusation hung in the air between them, heavy as lead. Elena closed her eyes, remembering the feeling of Gabriel's small, warm body against her chest. The sweet baby scent mingled with the aroma of breast milk. 3 days. They'd only had 3 perfect days before reality turned into a nightmare. The sound of the wood being ripped apart began again, more violent now. David worked with a desperate fury, as if each board removed brought him closer to a truth he could no longer live without knowing. Elena watched, mesmerized by the destructive rhythm, when a chilling thought pierced her. What if David was right? What if Gabriel truly was here, buried beneath their feet all these years? The house had always felt off. Inherited from David's grandmother, it carried with it a history no one in the family liked to talk about. Whispers about the Congregation of Eternal Light, the religious group that met in the years leading up to the old woman's death. Elena had never given much credence to the stories, but now, watching David excavate like a possessed man, she began to question her own disbelief. "They told me it was for the greater good," David murmured, his voice muffled by exertion, "that sacrifices were necessary to achieve spiritual purity." Elena felt her blood run cold. Who said that? David stopped digging and turned to her, his face contorted with pain. "Don't you remember? That night, when we woke up and he was gone. You were so calm. You said it was God's plan." "I was in shock," Elena protested, but even as she spoke, confused fragments of memory began to surface. Whispering voices, lit candles, the kind face of Martha, the midwife who had helped with the delivery, talking about destiny and divine purpose. "I didn't know what I was saying." "Martha was there," David continued, returning to his work with renewed intensity. "She and the others. They said Gabriel had been chosen, that it was an honor." The name Martha made Elena shudder. The woman had disappeared shortly after Gabriel's birth, taking with her any explanation of what had really happened that night. The police had asked some questions, but with no evidence of a crime, the case was quickly closed as abandonment. Elena had always known there was more to the story, but she had chosen to bury her suspicions along with her grief. A different crack echoed through the room. David had found something. "Elena," he called, his voice trembling. "Come here." She approached slowly, each step a torture. The smell of damp earth and something else, something rotten and ancient, rose from the hole David had dug. There, wrapped in a cloth yellowed with age, was a small bundle. "My God," Elena whispered, falling to her knees. "Is it him?" David didn't answer. With trembling hands, he began to unwrap the fabric. Elena closed her eyes, unable to watch, but unable to look away either. The silence stretched between them until David let out a low, tortured groan. "It's not him," he said finally. Elena opened her eyes. In place of a baby's bones, there was an antique doll, its blonde hair faded and its porcelain face cracked. Attached to the doll were yellowed photographs and a folded letter. "What is this?" Elena asked, but David was already reading the letter, his face paling with each line. "It's from Martha," he said, his voice almost inaudible. She left instructions about Gabriel, about what they did to him." Elena snatched the letter from David's hands, her eyes scanning the words written in elegant, old-fashioned script. "To those who come after me, who do not understand the sacred duty we fulfilled. Gabriel was not killed. He was transformed, elevated to a higher plane through the ritual of transcendence. His physical body was offered to the sacred earth, but his essence lives among us, guiding our steps. Seek the abandoned chapel, where the stones sing with his eternal voice. He awaits you there, on the threshold between worlds." Elena felt the world spin around her. What chapel? What ritual? David was looking at the photographs with a growing expression of horror. "Elena, you need to see this." The photos showed a small chapel in the middle of the woods, surrounded by hooded figures around a stone altar. One of the photos clearly showed Martha holding a baby Elena instantly recognized as Gabriel. "Where is this place?" she asked, but she already knew the answer. The woods behind the house, where she had never ventured, where David always said it was dangerous to go alone. "He's alive," David whispered, a spark of desperate hope flickering in his eyes. Or at least, part of him is. Elena knew she should be rational, should explain to David that rituals and transcendence were just sick excuses for a horrible crime. But a part of her, the part that had never stopped searching for Gabriel in every child's face she passed on the street, wanted to believe. Wanted to believe that somehow, in some impossible way, her son was still out there, waiting for her. "Let's go," she said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "Let's go to the chapel." There was something in the air, a low, constant vibration, as if the forest itself were breathing. "What is it?" "Music," David said, and Elena realized he was right. Somewhere ahead, barely audible, a strange, ethereal melody drifted between the trees. They continued walking, and the music grew clearer. It wasn't instruments Elena recognized, but voices. Many voices singing in unison, in a language she didn't understand. The sound made her stomach churn, but it also exerted a hypnotic pull impossible to resist. The chapel appeared suddenly, as if it had materialized out of thin air. It was smaller than Elena had imagined, little more than a stone hut with a collapsed roof and moss-covered walls. But light spilled from its broken windows, and silhouettes moved within. "They're still here," David whispered, and Elena realized he was trembling. "After all these years, they're still here." Elena wanted to run. She wanted to grab David's hand and run back to the safety of home, away from this place that smelled of damp earth and ancient secrets. But then she heard it, clear as if it were happening right beside her ear, the cry of a baby. "Gabriel," she whispered, and before she could stop herself, she was running toward the chapel. "Elena!" David shouted behind her, but she had already reached the entrance. What she saw inside stopped her dead in her tracks. The chapel was filled with people, men and women of all ages, all dressed in simple white robes. They were arranged in a circle around the stone altar, And in the center of the circle, on a high chair like a throne, sat Martha. The woman hadn't aged a day. Her hair was still the same glossy brown, her face still held the same maternal softness Elena remembered, but her eyes had a glassy, distant quality that made Elena feel as if she were looking at an animated corpse. "Elena," Martha said, her voice carrying across the chapel as if amplified, "we've been expecting you." Elena felt David approach behind her, but she couldn't turn around. She was hypnotized by the scene before her, by the impossibility of it all. "Where is Gabriel?" she asked, surprised by the firmness in her own voice. Martha smiled, a smile that didn't reach her dead eyes. "He's with us. He's always been with us." One of the congregation members, an elderly man with a white beard, approached carrying something in his arms. Elena gasped when she realized it was a baby, wrapped in white cloths, quiet and still. "No," she whispered, but Martha shook her head. "Don't misunderstand," the woman said. "This isn't Gabriel. This is, how can I explain, an extension of him, a continuation." Elena felt her sanity slipping. "What are you talking about?" Martha rose from the throne, moving with an unnatural grace. "The ritual of transcendence doesn't destroy, my dear. It transforms. Gabriel was the first, but not the last. Each child we receive, each pure soul we elevate, becomes part of the same collective consciousness. They live through us, and we through them." "You're insane," David said, his voice hoarse with rage. "You killed our son." "We liberated him," Martha gently corrected. "And now we can liberate you too." It was then that Elena realized they were surrounded. The members of the congregation had moved silently, forming a circle around her and David. Their faces were serene, but there was an unyielding determination in their eyes. "You can't keep us here," Elena said, but even as she spoke, she knew her words sounded hollow. They were in the middle of the woods, far from any help, surrounded by people who clearly had no connection with reality. "We don't want to keep you," Martha said. "We want you to join us, to become part of the eternal family." Elena felt David shift behind her, and suddenly he was beside her, holding a large rock in his hands. "Stay away from us," he yelled, and Elena could see the utter despair in his eyes. Martha sighed, as if dealing with a stubborn child. "Violence isn't necessary, David. Come with us willingly. Feel the peace that Gabriel feels." "He's dead," Elena screamed, surprised by the fury that erupted from the depths of her chest. "You killed my baby." "He's here," Martha said simply, and pointed to the altar. "Listen." Elena didn't want to listen. She didn't want to give these crazy people another second of her attention. But then she heard it again, the cry of a baby, coming from somewhere impossible to locate, echoing through the stone walls, as if it were part of the architecture itself. "Gabriel," she whispered, and felt her defenses crumble. "He's calling for you," Martha said, approaching with slow, measured steps. "He wants you to come home." Elena knew it was crazy. She knew that whatever had happened to Gabriel, he wasn't alive. He wasn't waiting for her in some abandoned chapel in the middle of the woods. But the sound of that cry was so real, so familiar, that she found herself walking toward the altar. "Elena, no!" David shouted, but his voice seemed to come from far away. The altar was larger than it had appeared from a distance, made of polished gray stone that reflected the light of the candles around it. Symbols were carved into its surface, intertwined circles, strangely shaped stars, words in a language Elena couldn't read, but somehow understood. And there, in the center of the altar, was a small niche. And inside the niche, impossible but undeniable, was a baby. It wasn't Gabriel, at least not the Gabriel Elena remembered. This baby was translucent, as if made of glass or water,
and its eyes were points of light that seemed to contain entire universes. But when it smiled her, and Elena recognized that smile instantly. "My baby," she whispered, reaching out her hands. "Elena, don't touch him," David shouted, but it was too late. The moment Elena's fingers brushed the ethereal skin of the child, a wave of memories hit her. She saw the night of the birth again, but this time from a different perspective. She saw Martha and the other members of the congregation entering the room silently. She saw herself willingly handing over Gabriel, hypnotized by the midwife's soothing words about destiny and divine purpose. She saw the ritual in the chapel with
Scene: Miguel's kitchen. Miguel watched from the kitchen window into the backyard, where the rose bushes Helena had planted continued to bloom, even after 9 years. 9 years without his daughter, 9 years without his wife, who couldn't bear the loss and had left on a cold winter morning, leaving only a crumpled note on the table. "I can't pretend anymore that she'll come back." The coffee grew cold in his trembling hands, its bitter aroma mixing with the lingering scent of fresh paint from the walls he obsessively repainted, as if he could erase the memories clinging to the corners of the house. The doorbell rang 3 times, insistent. Miguel hesitated before opening the door, knowing it would be another salesperson or a nosy neighbor wanting to stir up the past. But he found a thin woman, her hair gray and her eyes deep set, clutching a briefcase to her chest like a shield. "Mr. Torres, I'm Dr. Marcia Stone, from the Hope Foundation. I need to talk to you about your daughter." Her voice was gentle, but there was something in her eyes that made Miguel's stomach clench. He let her in, noticing how she examined every corner of the room. The portraits of Isabella still hanging on the walls, the forgotten toy on the sofa he'd never had the heart to put away. The woman sat on the edge of the armchair, as if ready to flee at any moment. "Mr. Torres, I've worked with missing children cases for 20 years. Your case has always intrigued me, because—" she hesitated, fiddling with the papers in her hands. "Because there are patterns that repeat themselves, patterns you may not have noticed at the time." Miguel felt the air leave his lungs. What patterns? "In the last 5 years, 3 children have disappeared in neighboring towns. All were the same age as Isabella when she vanished. All were playing near the houses of solitary neighbors." She pulled photographs from the briefcase and spread them on the coffee table. And all these neighbors had something in common. They attended meetings of a very specific religious group. The photographs showed smiling children's faces, children who never came home. Miguel picked up one of the photos with trembling hands, recognizing something familiar in the girl's expression, the way she held a doll to her chest. "Do you remember your neighbor, August Miller?" Dr. Stone's question cut through the silence like a knife. How could he forget? August, the quiet man who lived in the blue house next door, who always offered Isabella candy and talked to her about cartoons. On the night the girl disappeared, he was the last to see her, saying she had returned home around 7 o'clock. The police questioned him, searched his property, but found nothing. August moved out 3 weeks later, claiming he couldn't stand the suspicious looks of the neighbors anymore. "He died 6 months ago," Dr. Stone continued. "Cancer. But before he died, he made a confession to a priest. The priest broke the confidentiality because he believed there were more lives at risk." Miguel felt the world spin around him. The room seemed to shrink, the walls closing in, and he had to hold on to the arm of the chair to avoid fainting. What did he confess? That he participated in rituals with a group that believed in the sacrifice of innocence to achieve spiritual purification. That there was a place where— she paused, observing Miguel's pale face— where they kept sacred offerings. The silence that followed was broken only by the ticking of the wall clock.
each second echoing like a hammer blow to Miguel's skull. He stood up abruptly, walking to the window overlooking the backyard. August's blue house had been empty for years, with for sale signs that no one ever took down. The shed in the back remained untouched, covered in ivy and neglect. "You're suggesting that she's still—" Miguel couldn't finish the sentence. "We don't know, but there's a chance, Mr. Torres. The other cases showed that the group kept the children alive for long periods as part of their rituals. If there's any possibility—" Miguel didn't wait for her to finish. He ran to the backyard, jumped the low fence separating the properties, and headed towards August's shed. Dr. Stone shouted after him, asking him to call the police first, but he had already lost 9 years of his daughter's life. He wouldn't lose another second. The shed's lock was rusty, but it gave way with a few kicks. The door creaked open, revealing a dark interior that smelled of mildew and something else, something sweet and sickening that made Miguel cover his nose with his sleeve. He turned on his phone's flashlight and swept the area. Stacked boxes, old tools, spiderwebs dancing in the still air. But in the back, partially hidden by a dirty blanket, there was a staircase leading down to a basement. Miguel descended the wooden steps that groaned under his weight. The smell grew stronger, mixing with a chemical odor that burned his nostrils. The flashlight illuminated a larger space than he expected, with concrete walls and a low ceiling supported by wooden beams. And then he saw. On the walls, hundreds of photographs. Children playing, laughing, running. Some he recognized from the photos Dr. Stone had shown. Others were unknown. And in the center of the back wall, enlarged and framed like an altar, was a photo of Isabella on her 7th birthday, blowing out the candles. Miguel stumbled backward, his heart pounding so hard he could hear his pulse in his ears. The flashlight trembled in his hands, creating dancing shadows that transformed the photographs into smiling specters. "Daddy?" The voice was weak, almost a whisper, but Miguel recognized it instantly. It was the voice he heard in his dreams that woke him in the middle of the night, that made him cry in the shower where no one could see. He swung the flashlight. Elena wanted to believe. She wanted to believe that Gabriel was really there, that the love between them was real, that her decision to stay had been motivated by something nobler than guilt and despair. But late at night, when the congregation slept and she was alone with the translucent children, Elena sometimes wondered if she hadn't simply become part of a collective delusion, if all those people weren't simply pretending to see what they wanted to see, believing what they needed to believe to live with what they had done. And on those nights, she wondered if David was right, if Gabriel really was dead, if she was caring for ghosts, if she had chosen madness over truth. But then dawn would break, and Gabriel would smile at her, and she would forget her doubts. Because even if it was all an illusion, even if she was crazy, even if she had made the wrong choice, at least she had her son back. And for a mother who had spent 25 years with empty arms, that was enough. Years later, when Elena was an old woman and Martha had passed the leadership of the congregation to her, new parents arrived at the chapel. They came seeking answers, seeking a way to cope with loss, seeking something greater than ordinary mortality. Elena welcomed them with the same kindness that Martha had used with her, offered the same promise of transcendence, the same opportunity of choice. And when they inevitably chose the path of the congregation, she helped them understand that they had made the right decision. Because Elena had learned that truth was less important than peace, that reality was less valuable than love, that sometimes the only way to live with an impossible loss was to accept an impossible lie. And when she held Gabriel in her arms, when he smiled at her with that smile she knew better than anything in the world, Elena knew she had found her form of transcendence, even if it meant transcending sanity itself.
The cycle continued, as it always had, as it always would. In the woods, in the abandoned chapel, where the stones sang with eternal voices and love was stronger than death. And if you want to continue following stories like this, exploring the boundaries between reality and illusion, love and obsession, be sure to subscribe for more tales that challenge our understanding of what's possible and what's true. Because in the end, the line between salvation and damnation is thinner than we'd like to admit.